everybody and their neighbor. Welcome back to Gear and Gigs. I'm Jet Stone, your host. So glad you could drop by. Today we're doing a little something different. Synthesis, analog synthesis to be exact. Reggie's here with me, and we're going to work with the Moog Little Phatty and talk about pulse width modulation, resonance, some of the basic analog synthesized stuff, because that's a real hot topic right now. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so the Little Phatty.
Okay, so Little Phatty's out of production.
Been out for a long time, but the cool thing about it is that it was the last synthesizer that the company produced that the late, great Dr. Robert Moog actually had his hands in part of the design and building of this. What essentially it was the last thing that he did, synthesizer-wise. So it's kind of special, you know, for the real Moog enthusiast. Plus, it's just so freaking simple. And they still do the Phatty line, but they're, you know, and they're great synths. The Sub Phatty, the Sub 37, whatever, subsequent 37 now, which, you know, that packed with way more features. But for a beginner synth,
I assume subsequent has a sequencer.
Yeah, I think they do have some sort of either that or at least some sort of advanced ARP. You know, there's some kind of something going on pretty good. I've only messed around with the first one, the Sub 37, which is kind of awesome. But
why do they call it Sub?
Sub, yeah. I mean, it kind of implies that. I don't know. I don't work for the company, so not 100% sure. You know what I mean?
Fine.
I mean,
come here.
It could. Maybe they thought it was substandard.
I will have answers. It's fine.
I will say this though: all the newer ones, the Sub whatevers, all have a nicer key bed than the Phatty did, and I think that's where the Phattys, they were made to be a budget thing, but they're also kind of a beginner thing because it's 4 knobs. There's 4 knobs across the top. Each one has its own section that it controls. And
now, some people will look at this and go, "Wait, there's 1, 2, 3, 4."
Well, that's
5, 6,
just
7 knobs.
Yeah, these knobs are just like panel knobs, and that's just the volume. That's your output volume.
So there's 4 active programming knobs.
Right, there's 4 active, like, dive into the synth and play around.
Show me something.
Okay, I'm going to start with something really simple and just
that's good for me.
That's something that a lot of people misunderstand, and that's pulse width modulation. And because it says pulse width modulation, they automatically think it's part of the modulation sector of the synthesizer, and it's not actually, because that's a separate thing. That's an LFO that, you know, can modulate different parameters as you program it, and whereas pulse width modulation is 2 oscillators both at some sort of variation of a pulse width, and the differences between them is the modulation. The oscillators themselves modulate a sort of a weird frequency modulation between the two, and the easiest way to show that is...
So if I could just stop you for a second. So the pulse they're referring to is the waveform?
The waveform itself,
so it's the waveform size.
Depending on where the pulse is, what the...
And then they put those 2 things together, and the plus or minuses are the things that make it sound flangey or chorusy or phasey or interesting.
Interesting. It makes the... Yes. Okay. That's a good way of putting it. Okay. It does a lot of that... okay. Without even getting too crazy, and you can get crazy with, especially Moogs, you can get crazy.
So the opposite of that, so to speak, would be when you sync the oscillators.
Yes, but that also gives you another weird sort of effect.
I see.
But that's the thing about synthesizers.
So this isn't the timing of the oscillators. This is the size of the oscillator.
It's the size of the
the length of the wave.
The length of the waves. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You know.
Show me. Let's see.
So basically. Right now I've got oscillator 2 off, so we're just going to hear, and modulation is also off all the way, and the cutoff the filter is just sort of right in the middle. So, and I've got all the envelopes set, you know, for quick on off kind of thing.
Okay.
So basically,
it's the most basic sound. You know,
yeah. Right now, this is just a triangle wave, a single triangle wave. So that's a triangle wave, and
it's Pong.
I can move it anywhere because it's variable. Moog gives you a lot of synthesizers. You can choose this wave or that wave or the other wave, but with the Moog it's continuously variable. So you're starting off with a triangle, but as you start moving toward a saw, it doesn't just go from one to the other. It kind of
give you an in between.
It kind of, because it's really analog. The wave actually kind of morphs from one to the next.
Interesting.
There's the triangle wave going into the sawtooth, going into the square, then we'll put it, find it a nice, that seems like a pretty nice place right there. So that's that full on, and now we'll bring in oscillator 2 and start over here with like the other one with a triangle, then move over, and then notice once I get into the square, you get this weird little, you'll probably hear it better than I can describe it. Probably bring that out more if I messed with the filter a little bit. And
is it a global filter, one filter for both oscillators?
Yes. And this is probably this great. I learned on one of these, not this particular one, but this is a stage 2 that is stage 1 a few years before the first one, and that was the synthesizer that I learned synthesis on, because it's literally just everything's right here in front of you, and there's no confusion, because like I said, every section there's only one knob, and if I change this to this, it'll automatically show me where it's set. The level's all the way, the level of this one's all the way, the wave on this one's set back. The wave here, if I set it way back here, then I can still go back to this wave and go back to that wave. So it always jumps to right wherever, so it gives you a visual cue of where you're at and what you're doing. But that's basically, that's pulse width modulation. And then we started playing with this a little bit. And that's what, people that love Moogs, that's what really, like, the heart of a Moog is the filter, because it just has that filter. It's, it's a low pass filter that literally
closes, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
And you can kind of push it a little bit, and then you can kind of push it a little more.
So overload, does it do a feedback cycle?
Yeah, it just feeds it back in, yeah. But I mean, even by itself, let's see if you throw a little resonance in there.
So resonance is like a negative feedback loop kind of a sound.
Well, resonance basically is like, if you think of the filter as a, however wide the band is that's moving, resonance is sort of the center frequency of it, the center frequency of the filter. So whatever that, it's like the Q, yeah, it's like the peak. But you can you can intensify the peak.
The center frequency.
And like if I really did, that's where you get those classic.
Right, love that.
And that's like a 1970s classic thing. You don't hear much of that anymore, but you could do like a modulation on that, where you have the pitch of that filter.
Right, because you assign a modulation.
Right over here, yeah, and I have it actually on the filter right now, but off. I gotta just open it back up. But there's a pretty badass. That's a good little. Yeah. So I have the filter on a triangle wave, which is the smoothest, and it's controlled by this. So right now the amount is nothing, but if I bring it up halfway, and then you can speed that up, and that's only the filter that's being modulated. The note under it is unaffected.
It's just the filter.
It's just the filter doing that.
How did you assign to the filter?
The destination being sent to the filter.
Sure, yeah.
So you have your sources are basically, you have 4 different shapes. So you have a triangle, a square, and then sawtooth both ways, reverse and whichever way is which. Sure. But 2 different sawtooths. You also have the filter envelope that you can use as a source, which just means that whatever's happening over here will have an envelope on it. Whatever the envelope for the filter is set on will affect the LFO over here. So if it's like a slow attack on the filter, then it's also a slow attack, so that wobble won't come immediate. It'll creep in.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So yeah, there's just a bunch of tricks you can do, and of course you can change the
So
you change the shape.
all the
changes
sci-fi
it,
shows,
right?
Yeah.
That one,
Nice.
and then the reverse.
Oh, hey, it's Pac-Man.
Yeah, there you go. But you can put it on the envelope.
Oh, it's totally different.
Because now it's looping through the envelope. So however so now
like
if I
the
wanted
same
to, I
hole.
could, since it's the filter envelope, I could. Anyway, oscillator 2 can also be affected, which is fun. You can do a kind of wave.
Interesting.
So I'm now only doing just oscillator 2. Oscillator 1 is still just playing.
It's interesting when you get oscillators going fast enough, they just make a tone at that point. Yeah, it's like it makes a sympathetic tone. That's weird. That's weird. Because you wouldn't think that was an oscillator making up a big part of that. Like,
Right.
I mean a modulation.
Right.
Making up a
And
big part of it. It sounds like an oscillator.
It does. It almost makes it sound like a 3 oscillator synth.
Interesting.
And it's 2, but 2 oscillator analog synths with 1 filter, 2 envelopes, and 1 LFO, and that's like basic building blocks. It's like the bare bones for a synthesizer. But once you have a grasp of all that, then having synthesizers that have 2 more envelopes that are assignable anywhere, so they become other modulation sources, because you have these envelopes that you can assign to the pitch of one oscillator or the other oscillator. So when you hit a key, the one oscillator is the pitch you want. The other one is on an envelope, so it starts somewhere and then opens up to the pitch, and then holds and drops, and
Right.
just like an envelope, you can actually assign envelopes to pitch, which is kind of crazy stuff, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about this, but we are out of time.
All right, well, there you go. Anybody that wants to know how to learn how to synthesize,
Wants to know how to learn
the basic building blocks. This is about the easiest real synth you find. I know them, nowadays you can get these little,
But this is a real
pro. So this thing,
Pro.
and
Getty leaves is what
and
it is, for God's sake.
and it feels,
Really,
a
it's
lot of people. These
These
things
special
are,
wood ends for this.
and people still use these.
Yeah,
believe it or
we
not,
just-
they still. Well, we do. We use one. I love the little sucker. Like I said, this is the second model. This one has a arpeggiator that the first one
We'll
didn't.
go into that next time.
Yeah, we didn't touch the envelopes really too much either.
Out of
Later.
time. Out of time.
Later. Until then.
I want to thank everybody for joining us for another episode of Gear and Gigs. Be sure to like and subscribe, and check us out on YouTube as well. For Reggie, I'm Jet, and we will talk to you next time on Gear and Gigs. Take care.